introduced a lot of characters. They had the trope of every musician walked forward with their instrument, and then the musical cue would illustrate that. It was kind of cute. They did it in their own way. But any feelings about the people you saw, or were they just sort of blanks? All right, Howard? Go ahead, Howard.
We're going through chronologically. Before the audition, I believe there's a very important part of the movie that sets the tone, which is when the sainted violin player from Calcutta is waiting in line at the checkpoint, and she's deals with these blonde-haired Israeli Nazi guards, Jewish Nazis, Israeli Nazis. And this, for me, sets the tone for the movie, which I felt was a very distorted.
Wait a minute, Howard. Why are you saying Jewish Nazis? That's a terrible phrase.
That's how they were portrayed.
That's what I'm saying. This film, if go back and watch it, this film presented not one but two IDF guards as Nazis. I mean, you must go here. Do not talk now. This is why do you say you have to go to Tel Aviv? You have no business in Tel Aviv.
Wait, Howard, you're right. They were overplayed.
I can't take that phrase.
Let me take it from you. You got me for Shiksa last week too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm trying.
But, I was going to say she was the Shiksa, but
just as strongly about it.
Howard,
I agree with Lisa. It was horrible. I hated to hear that. Sorry.
Howard, the point is there's a lot of bad performance in this movie, and it's part of what Steve Miller didn't believe about it. And that's the first insult. The performance overplayed hatred of the guard. There's a way to chill people, and we've talked about this before, minimalism, where less is more. You know, a cold stare is better than some hysterical step back, don't you know who you're talking to, or don't tell me what to do. The writing was terrible, the performance was terrible, the direction was terrible. So this is not a perfect film, but you've got to be willing to set the stage. And they did it in what you're describing as a ham-fisted way. I know you don't believe.
They presented the Israelis as Nazis. I didn't know what they were doing.
You know, look, a lot of Israelis feel the IDF is too tough on Palestinians.
Well, there are a lot of Israelis that think that they're the new Nazis. Anti-Semitism is not limited.
So they took a different point of view from you about the guard. I think it's a ham-fisted bit of poor filmmaking. You know, there was a way to make her much scarier by understating her. Similarly, go ahead.
Cold Stare would have been a totally different message.
Okay, and then how about I forget her name, the woman violinist. How about her mother, who was just as hysterical and filled with hate, operating at 110% of performance power, when 90% might have been better? She could have shown her despising the orchestra, the notion of going abroad, what's going to happen afterwards. You're 24 and there's no man in your life. I mean, all this stuff is just thrown in your face. It's metaphorical. It's not deeply personal.
She was portrayed as having blind hatred of Jews.
Right.
Now you're saying that was inaccurate because in your mind she loves Jews, but it was bad acting.
In my mind,
or you're saying she should have been shown as somebody that loves Jews or that doesn't.
No. I'm saying it's the same. No, you're not understanding. Just like the blonde-haired Israeli guard, this woman performer, probably an Arab, was also acting at 110%. Bad performance. And
I totally disagree, Jim.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the performance. They portrayed the guard to communicate a certain message and activity that was not bad acting. It was an insulting representation of how the Israeli guards at the checkpoints are.
Steve, you're splitting hairs. The bad performance.
It was deliberate. I don't think it was the acting. It was what they wanted to.
Okay,
exactly.
Then let's dial it back and talk in real film terms. No, let's. If the actor or actress, as some might say, are permitted to perform that on camera, blame goes to the director. So you can say, wanted to have a really shrill IDF guard and to start off with hatred from the Jews. So it's his fault. So it's not the actor's fault. Somebody allowed that to happen.
Yes, and it was.
He was a co-writer. He directed.
I
think
see
it was
this differently. I see this.
That is not the
You think
He
the
was
director-
writer, too. He wasn't just the
Teresa?
director, he was the writer, right?
I think they were trying
He's
to show you how the Arab child saw what was happening. I don't think that is the way it actually happens, but I think they were telling me this is what this young girl is seeing. Even if the guard just said, no, you can't. I don't want it. The child would see it with that kind of anger and fear. So I don't say the movie was bad at all in the acting. But of course, I'm not an actor. I'm not a director.
It's not about the acting. It's about
a message.
The filmmaker's intention. It's the message.
It's the message.
But this is not fantastical realism, right? This is not an illusion, a dream that the young girl had at the border or Omar had when they hassled him and his father. No, it was set up to show the cards are stacked against the Arabs. That's the 2 checkpoint scenes. All right, that's it. So, granted, I think it could have been just Steve. He didn't have to go far, but the director is.
Can we see?
Okay,
Your sound is breaking up again.
The sound was frozen.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me know.
We tried.
Okay. The point is that the filmmakers allow this to happen. The buck stops with the director, right? That's it. So say he's a lousy director because he didn't portray a real checkpoint scene. He manipulated an iconic piece of bigotry and exaggerated it for effect. I don't think that, yes, the young girl and the young man did see it that way as horrible, but he didn't have to go that far to have the same effect. You look at The Namesake and the understated performances in that, or some of the Japanese films we have seen and will see. Less goes a long way in movies, and it's a lot more believable than hysteria.
But you're assuming there was bigotry. I don't even think all of the guards at checkpoints are so bigoted.
Steve, if everything has to be realistic, there'd be no movie.
No, it doesn't have to be realistic, but this is so slanted that it's disturbing, and it detracts from the movie a great deal.
I agree. And I think there was a fix. I think the director could have handled both scenes at the checkpoint better, that would have pleased you and made you feel like, well, they were a little unpleasant, but it was more real. You know, the overstatement is what really got to you. Joanne?
Wasn't that the point, to make it seem that those Palestinian kids were really frightened and terrified, and it was terrible what happened?
Well, it was not the first time either one of them had gone through a checkpoint. That was not a new experience. Granted, they weren't as experienced as their parents, but it's a matter of tone and balance, you know, and I think we have to move on to the rest of the movie, but you have to go with it in order to see what it has to offer. Unless it so disgusts you or you're bored, then you leave. But I'm saying leave for the right reasons. You know, that wasn't enough to drive me away. It just made me say, oh, that actress and that performance, the direction was just so bad. This guy is like, he needs to be told no to, the director. So, you know, that's how I saw it. I wasn't offended because I love IDF agents at the border, nor do I hate them, you know, and I accept the necessity of the checkpoints. But you can't let these things throw you off track, or you'll never let the movie do its magic if it's going to. And you'll see tonight, Steve and Howard, that some people here were very affected by the film.
Yeah, I was.
And I'll embarrass them later. Enid, okay.
Yeah, I
Just a short
absolutely
description
was.
of how you were affected.
Well, one thing I didn't like was, I don't know if you, noticed twice during the movie, when something, I don't know, egregious happened, they said, fucking Jews again, or, fucking Jews. And I didn't like that. Did you?
Well, that's
I
the
don't
way they
take
felt
offense to
about
that.
them.
I've seen it.
I know, but
Yeah.
Risa, how did you feel about that?
Absolutely real.
Yeah, I don't understand all this discussion
When I like the movie.
about and criticism. How many of you have experienced going through a checkpoint as a Palestinian? How do we know this isn't absolutely realistic? And of course, when they're angry at Israelis, they're using that language. What do we expect if it's supposed to be a realistic portrayal of the hostility each side feels towards the other? I thought it was perfectly acceptable
So did
to
I.
have every bit of the conflict portrayed as it was.
You know, when you're telling a
The
movie,
idea of the movie was that here they were going to try to bring this group of kids together to surmount that abyss and try and get them to work together as a team.
look, the focus is on the two young lovers, and they couldn't
Yes.
profile all of
Yeah.
the musicians or follow them around and show what anti-Arab sentiment they've been exposed to. It's a group story, and it's painted in broad brushes. And yeah, you know, like I said, it's not subtle, but they felt they needed it to establish the enmity between the two sides so they could then meet in the audition hall and start fighting. So it comes from something, you know, whether you liked it or agree with it or not. Doris.
I was going to say about using the language that you use, Risa, the way they talked about the Jews, and they probably heard it all their lives in their home.
Yeah.
Just like kids today hear things in their home, like they hate the blacks, and so the kids grow up hating, or they hate the Jews and they grew up hating. So I think it was just something they heard and maybe had no other experiences, and they just adopted it for their own lifestyle.
Look, this is the hypocrisy of our time. Even Orthodox Jews, you know, would say that to any of you women if you walk down the street in an Orthodox community and had your arms exposed, right? They'd spit on you. They, you know, it's like there's an intense tribalism that is rampant. And that's what we're seeing here. The people forget about the bigger picture. Like, we're all musicians, you know, can't we come together over the music? And luckily the film doesn't take that kind of simplistic, you know, let the music bring us together. That's not really what brought them together. He brought them together because of the therapy sessions he had with them. And I'd really like to move our discussion to that in the remaining hour, because that's, for me, that's the heart of the film. So how do you see the other side empathetically? You know, and those attorneys among us, I see several, more than I have fingers, I think. Well, yeah, I only have 4 fingers. I don't count the thumb. There are at least 4 attorneys here. I'd like to move into that. But a third of the way through the film, there's something else that was very subtle. I didn't notice this the first time. In the very opening of the film, we have the skirmish on the street and the tear gas that's released. And it disturbs the girls practicing, right? She has to close the windows and she gets teary, but the Jewish violinist gets to soldier around and play because he's in a different part of town. In terms of visual storytelling, they didn't distinguish between the two households well enough. But it's a statement that he can live this life totally devoted to his violin and practicing uninterrupted, and the violence erupts all around her, even if she's a pacifist. Omar, has to go play in Arab weddings on the weekends, you know? And he doesn't play Vivaldi and Mozart and Ravel as we.
Super quick question about that scene when Jim comes back.
We lost you again, Jim.
Why does he freeze? Is it where he
I don't
lives?
I don't know.
Sorry, everyone. Looks like we told Jim for a second there.
It's more than a second, but it's
Yeah.
He has unstable internet, evidently.
Yeah, we totally
Oh,
lost him.
You're muted, Jim.
No, he's totally gone.
No,
And
no, he's
There
on
we
now.
go. There we go.
Okay. I'm sorry. I live very far away from my Wi-Fi router, and I have to do something about that.
Jim, quick question about that scene. What's up with the onions that Layla cuts?
I think that's
Does
the
that
antidote
help?
to tear gas.
Okay, that's what I thought.
That's all I could figure out. Better to cry because the tears wash away the tear gas too. So if the onion makes you cry, it's like flushing your eyes with milk or water.
I read that that's a Palestinian idea that to fight tear gas, you use an onion. That they customarily do that. I read it in one of the things on the few things that I could find on the web about this movie.
A million and a half Arabs who are citizens of Israel can't be wrong. That's a joke. You've ever heard 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong, even though they have them. Okay, that didn't go over very well. But I'm just saying that here we have two different kinds of proving the case, setting the context of hatred and how it affects the musicians in different ways. I thought that was more skillful than the crazy mother or the rabid guard at checkpoint who wouldn't give them the time of day. And we have seen this in other movies too. If this weren't a film about Jews and Arabs, but just about some checkpoint with darker skinned people trying to cross the line, you can bet, if you're trying to get into Turkey or, whatever. I'm just saying that this is kind of a cliched scene. It was easy, low-hanging fruit for the writer and the director to select. But I want to go to this moment when he calls the Jewish violinist, and what's your name again? The Arab violinist? Layla. Okay, so he called Layla and Yossi, or
So it's Yonatan.
What, Yonatan? Is it Yoni?
I thought it was Jonathan.
Yeah, okay. So when he calls them together and he says, talk, and he says, you have to risk the assumption that the other person doesn't have bad intent for you. Whereas both sides have grown up and lived their lives believing that the other side has ill intent. So you can't ever see them as a human being when the number one identity you have assigned to the other person is enemy or possible harm doer to me, right? We have various blockades before we can get to the real person. And that one excludes all other information from getting through to you or from you perceiving it in ways that would make you trust them. So that evil intent is a fog that everybody carries around them when you're an outsider and you feel you're the recipient of their ire. But this was interesting. You have to risk something to make gains. You have to risk your vulnerability. What if I got hurt? What if they hit me? What if they killed me? Well, those are all risks. You have to assess them. But that's what encounter groups, such as Peter Simonishek, the conductor, tried to stage, was a safe environment where they could process all this anger and hatred and passion, in a safe pressure cooker where the steam could be let off and then what remained behind could be dealt with. Did anybody notice this beautiful practice room? What was on the window in it? A grate. Looked like a jail. One window, right? There were other light sources and coming in, but I think that was very intentional. And when he pulls that cord out between the two groups on the floor, it divides the rails, that are on the window. And I think that was very intentional because they love that shot. I don't know if that was a set or not. By the way, most of this was shot in Germany. So I suspect that villa may have been a real villa. It wasn't shot in Italy. And again, it can be just exteriors. The practice rooms, even the bedrooms, could have been a stage, because remember, we never really saw outside those windows. They're blown out with light. So that's a way you get to shoot a big film for not much money, is you just hide the outside. They talk, Yossi and Layla. And, she reveals that she's the one who say he should have the solo. So she risks giving him something. You see, this is the first step. She demonstrates she had good intentions, she doesn't have anything against him. And she tried to show that by assigning the solo to him. She told the maestro to give it to him in the Pachelbel's canon. And it's the first moment of a breakthrough, isn't it? She surprises him. Look at the reaction on his face. So that's the first step. Then the conductor goes and sees the woman who took care of him when he was a boy and sheltered his parents. We'll get to him in a second. But I want to go to the first exercise where he pulls a rope across the floor and he says, stand opposite and start yelling at each other. No hitting, don't step closer. And it slowly grows. It was very nicely done with the sound, where it's first one person and then another, then three, and it escalates into a din. And then what do we see? How do we define the two characters, the lovebirds, right? They're the ones who are horrified by the yelling. Both she and he don't yell. They're frozen because they've never seen such outright hatred portrayed. Maybe as an Israeli girl, she's been sheltered. We don't know anything about her family, other than they could pay for French horn lessons and a French horn. All we know about Omar is that he's a poor kid who plays in his father's band, and his family is close to Layla's family. Yet these two are loners among all the others because they can't yell. That's somebody's horn, it's not mine, not the movie. Okay, oh, I see. So
it's my parking lot.
This distinguishes these two people as unique. I mean, I hope you see that they're going to get together from the first moment they sit down in the rehearsal room, the day of the first audition. They sort of strike up a conversation, and then the female violinist gives a dirty look, like, you know, you Israeli girl, don't be nice to my friend here. The stage is set, and again, this is another one of the heavy-handed moments that the director chose to play out. But it's this shouting match. What has anybody ever witnessed a real shouting match or an encounter group where such a thing has happened that you've witnessed? Abby, are you waving or cleaning the lens on your phone? You're muted, but
neither. Well, I mean, I just said that the way they started arguing was it was a comparison to the Pachelbel canon, how each instrument increased. Okay. That's musically, I mean, it was the same.
Well, I think that's one reason why they picked the canon, because, and you'll notice at the very end it's bolero and the pieces join, in airport. It's the same kind of thing where the musicians come together as one. So that's a good observation. But don't give the film too much credit. I love the concept, and I'm really fond of this middle section, especially because I think it's giving people an experience they've never had before. I, in my youth, was quite an aficionado of sessions like that. You'd see real stuff happen, where 40 minutes before people were just cold and trapped and frozen. And the skillful leaders would lead you in these exercises to break through not just your barriers with the other people, but your barriers with yourself. This first exercise, how does it end? After the fade out, we come back in, and Howard's on the floor exhausted with the rest of them. Howard, you're muted. You're muted, Howard.
My space bar doesn't work. The way it ends, I thought that this whole shouting encounter, primal scream or whatever it was.
Yes.
Was a big part of the movie, and I'm still on the track that I was before. You haven't convinced me that this is an inept director. I think this is and writer. I think this is somebody who's sending a message very intentionally, a propaganda message. And here's what the two main points that really stood out to me in the shouting encounter. First is a very dramatic moment when one of the sainted Palestinians talks about how her grandfather's
That's after the shouting match.
Yeah.
That's after it.
Right. Well, it's part of, to me, it's the resolution.
Then please save that comment for when we get to it, which will be in about a minute.
All right.
Okay. So how does the shouting end? People have collapsed on the floor. They're exhausted. They're screamed and shouted out, and they probably can't even think of anything bad to say. Their vocabulary of curse words and hatred has been spent.
I also read about this, that the director says the way he created this scene was he just told the Israelis who were acting on one side and the Arabs who were acting on the other side just shout at each other and say everything bad you can think of.
Well,
and it's sort of improvised. They just made it all up. So I believe the Arabs were just trying to make the director happy, and I mean the Israelis were saying things.
But the Arabs were sincere with their. I see. The Israelis were acting, and the Arabs were.
Well, both sides.
Who was sincere and who was fake?
What?
Who was sincere and who was fake?
I think that some of what the Jewish actors, I can't speak for the Arab actors, said was probably nothing they would have ever said in real life. They were trying to put on a performance that the director asked them to put on.
No. The conductor asked them to leak out the director's perception of these latent hostility, the feeling that they've grown up with but haven't expressed before. This is the point of the exercise, that the other side triggers something in you.
But in the making of the movie, these were actually actors, and they were told to just yell at each other and say,
they knew what to yell. In the improv, they knew what to yell. The Jews as well as the Palestinians. They may never have done it before. They may have protected what they said in public, but they knew what to say.
Okay, look, all these handsome people, regardless of their side or gender or lack of thereof, were actors. I believe most of them were. I can't say that. Some of them may have been just musicians who were cast. But improv is a very common tool that directors use to create big feelings. Let's just shoot it and see what happens. And why, again, this is a form of minimalism coming from the director, where you give the actors permission to be who they are, to draw on what actors call their own instrument, right? Their kavana. Those of you who, do Torah study, the ultimate sincerity of your feeling, let it come out, let it express itself, however it may be, uncensored. The scene will tolerate it. And I'm sure he gave the same directions to the Arabs. It's not that you didn't understand the words. It's you look at their faces, you listen to the sound of the voices. Some of the voices may have been created later in post-production after they shot the scene, but this is what they chose to present. And you have to accept what you saw as being real, or the scene won't work for you. If you go through every scene and you're saying, there's an actor, the film's not working for you. But you have to say, oh, there's that arrogant violinist really letting go with his nastiest feelings, towards the Arabs. You have to play along with it to see what the point is. So, that it was improv doesn't impress me. I think those two scenes, like there's a scuffle after in Tel Aviv, and that's why they decide to go to the Tyrol. Right? Because they fight with each other there. So they have to change the environment to help purge the biases that they grew up with. That's why they moved to the remote location. But that's a similar kind of scuffle, which wasn't choreographed. It wasn't even covered very well. The sound treatment was good, but it was convincing. And you see these kids, these musicians who you think are going to be timid and meek, they're quite violent on both sides. And you see it again in the shouting match. But let's get back to the consequences of the shouting match. These people shouted it all out. It's like if you've ever cried over something tragic or disappointing, you reach a point where you can't cry anymore, whether it's in a shiva or a fight with your parents when you were a kid, or with a loved one or a lover. You reach a point where there is no more point to continue. and I think both sides, in the filmmaker's parlance, that he chose to show, was that they exhausted their reservoir of hatred, where they had no more ammunition or vocabulary. And then what happens, Howard? Out of the ashes of the exercise comes two stories. You started to tell the first one in your reactions.
Well, the first story is my grandfather. The Jews stole my grandfather's land, and they murdered. I think he said he murdered the grandmother before she was killed. She gave him the key to the house, and he looks at the key every day. Then everybody says, "Oh my God, this is there's truth on both sides. Let's hear the Jewish side." So the Jewish guy says, "My grandmother was killed in the Holocaust, and my whole family was killed in the Holocaust." So this, in my opinion, is not a mistake. It's deliberate. It's presenting a narrative, the Arab narrative, that Israel is there because the European countries have guilt over the Holocaust, but the burden falls on the Palestinians. They have all their land stolen.
So you feel that
have a homeland.
You feel that the Israeli explanation trumps the Palestinian explanation?
No, in the movie, the Israeli explanation is gaslighting. It's a made up explanation. It's like the Arab advocates always bring this up. When Obama went to Egypt at the beginning of his term and he gave his speech at the university, he brought up the injustices that were done to the Palestinians, and then the injustice of the Holocaust. And he didn't say anything about any right of the Jews to have a homeland. Otherwise, it was because of the Holocaust. And it's not the justification for Israel.
Okay. I feel we're going south with this discussion, and it's not productive when we go to places like this. The point is, this was the director's intent. And I think you're misconstruing his intent. He didn't mean to say one would trump the other, excuse the expression. Let's ask other people, how did you feel that no, Howard, no, I'm sorry.
Nothing else I can say.
Well, good, because now other people should talk about.
I'll give you that it could be that this writer and director is very inept, and even though he's having his movie say one thing, he meant something else. If you'll give me that, it could be that he is selling a very anti-Israel point of view.
I disagree. You're allowed your point of view, but I base my decision on the overall impact of the movie. How does it end? They make relative peace with each other. They share grief. I didn't want to get to this at this point in the conversation. One of their own, somebody who went through this conversion process with them, and there's 6 steps to it, if we can get to it. Steve, you're next. The only way you know somebody is through shared experience. It's not just hearing about your parents and grandparents. It's working with them, having common problems that you solve together, like the second movement of Dvorak's symphony. So I say that as the film progresses, we reach this kind of closure, that little steps are possible, that some agreement of shared grief is possible, that it can bring us together, just like the grieving parents circle that is composed of Palestinians and Israeli parents who don't hate each other and go to high schools and colleges and travel the world with their message. I don't hate, because that's self-destructive. I think that's what the filmmaker intended. I think he could have done a better job of it, but I think that was his sincerest effort, was to establish that, not to have an agenda that, well, our stories are sadder than your stories, and nobody ever acknowledges that. But I'd like to throw out to other people. Steve, you can go first and say, were you at all moved by the Arab girl's story of her great-grandfather and grandfather, and that one of them still carries the key to the home?
Very little, but I agree with Howard, and it's one of the problems here is it's part of what the media does. They, on one side, they give the story that everybody gives. Then they give the other story that same side likes to give and refute as a straw man. I mean, none of the I don't think that's the story any Jewish kid would give about their family or being in Israel. The whole thing, I felt, demonized the Israelis more than appropriate. I'm not saying none of the Israelis hate Arabs. But I agree with Howard. There was an agenda. This whole thing was presented by somebody who lacked enough of a full understanding of the conflict and the history. And we end up with a very warped, I think, pro-Palestinian peace. And even at the end, he's better, he gets the solo, they make peace, she's with the orchestra. And then toward the end, even Layla, who seems to have been the most open and agreeing, is saying, fuck the Jews again.
Right. I agree.
I just didn't buy any of it, and I felt a lot of it was propaganda, and it's these false equivalencies.
Fine.
And I agree with Howard.
You're entitled to do that, but tell me, what did you think of the scene at the airport? Did it move you at all?
Sure.
Why?
I think they all realized that they'd made some progress. That was like one of the few scenes that I believed, given everything that happened.
Okay.
But
so
the whole way you get there and everything, I didn't buy.
But it still moved you, so it means a part of you did buy it. You felt that what they shared in common, what they expressed in terms of mutual emotion while playing the music at the end, was real and sincere.
But not that it was connected to anything that happened before that in the movie.
Okay, so you could have seen that on your own without the rest of the movie and said, that's great.
An idea of how they got there, but I'm not sure it flowed from the movie.
Okay, believe me, there's no right or wrong about this, but how did other people feel about the Palestinian girl? Michael, and then Joanne, and then Doris.
Well, I want to take your question last. I first wanted to just make one point about the Israeli musician telling the anecdote about his relatives that we were all talking about, which is nobody so far tonight has mentioned the end of that story, which I think was actually the relevant part. Holocaust was lead up. The end was that his aunt was killed during the War of Independence when Israel's Arab neighbors attacked. That, I think, was actually the relevant point of that story.
You're right.
She survived the Holocaust, but she got killed in the War of Independence.
She surrendered, and they shot the people who surrendered. They didn't take prisoners of war.
Yeah, exactly. For myself, I thought that the film did a remarkable job of portraying the good and the bad of both sides. It felt, I have to say, to me, it felt pretty even-handed. I felt like the degree to which any particular character was able to grow and reach out, and the degree to which any particular character reverted back to animal hatred was pretty even-handed for the most part. As for Layla at the end throwing the rock, which I think you just asked about, I have to say what that reminded me of more than anything was the end of Do the Right Thing.
Yes.
And I feel like
which we saw, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. The reason for that imbalance is because it was a Palestinian who was killed. And even though I think it's very unfair of Layla to put that at the feet of the Jews, I mean, is she blaming Shira for falling in love with him and running away with him? It's unclear, or just that Shira's Jewish uncle is now coming to take her away and break up the band. It's unclear to me what exactly she's reacting to, but to me, it's just the overall zeitgeist of every time Jews and Palestinians get together, it ends badly for Palestinians, is how she sees it. And that's what she's reacting to, and that's what leads to that rock. That's my view of it.
Well, but let's remember that it's some neo-Nazi who shot him. It wasn't the security guards. It was a far-off shot that brought him down.
I thought he got hit by a car.
No, it was a gunshot.
Oh, I thought that was a car impact.
It was an accident.
Strange sounding one.
It was an accident. The movie, I went over it very carefully. It was an accident.
It doesn't matter. The
accident.
point is, the
There was
Jews
no-
get blamed because Omar was killed
Yeah,
when the
it-
Jews
an
had nothing to
accident.
do with it.
It was a freak accident.
Doesn't matter. Again, don't let the facts get in the way of a decent movie. You know, it can have its flaws, but let's try and see how it actually worked on us. And if that is enough to make you not like the movie or follow it, then fine. I can't do anything about that. Doris, you had something to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought this was based on a true story. Am I
No, I
wrong?
misled you. Such orchestras have been brought together, but it was not Daniel Barenboim. It was
This
not the
particular
orchestra that
movie
he
was
put
not
together.
based on a true story. Is that
Right. But the writer and director knew of such youth orchestras and wrote a story around that. And Spork's parents were Nazi doctors, and he saw them killed by the people who sheltered them. You know, it's a bit of pathos, but they did get some mileage out of that. By the way, that is interesting, that he carries with him his own shame of being the descendant of a Nazi. And this is something we've talked about in all our films, that there's survivor's guilt as well. And he never escaped the brand of Nazi from his parents, yet he had nothing to do with their exterminating Jews in camps. And it branded him forever. He could not get rid of the curse that he put upon himself, as well as, you know, he didn't get much of it in when he was working in Frankfurt, but in his lifetime, he did, you know, and growing up, he certainly had that. So he himself was damaged goods and was caught in the middle, right? He was the victim of violence. He was the victim of a bias, of hatred for something he had nothing to do. These kids couldn't help if they were born Jewish or Arab, right? Just like he couldn't help that his parents were Nazis. So he knows full well the push-pull of being in that position. Maybe better than they do because he's 50 years older than they are. But let's move on. Oh, Joanne, you chime in, unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I thought those Palestinian stories were quite valuable because, true or not, we never think about the Palestinians other than the fact that they want to destroy Israel and they hate the Jews. But I'm sure there are stories like that out there, and I'm sure there are people that really truly believe them, and you know, and that's part of what.
No, this film was made for an Israeli Jewish audience and an international audience. It was not made to show the Arab citizens of the Middle East. They see what good people we are, see what we can all do together.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that there are stories, you know,
yeah,
that we don't hear.
I mean, that's why we have to say it's just a movie. Let's take it on its own terms instead of the terms of the real world, as far as we can. Because, you know, there's a million examples to refute either position, either side in this movie. And what the movie is trying to do, what all movies try to do, is to bring us through the shared experience of watching the movie, empathizing with the characters through their travails, whether we like the character or not, but understanding the current situation in every scene so that we feel like we've gone through the same narrative as they, and that the catharsis of the ending is ours as well. Catharsis, right? It's a dramatic term for ultimate feeling of resolution. You could say their exhaustion at the end of the shouting match was a kind of catharsis. It wasn't total or complete, but it takes you to a different place. And that's what this movie is trying to do, even if it was trying to educate white people or Jewish people. So let's move on to the second exercise. That's when he draws a line and he says, everybody who wants peace go to one side and everybody who doesn't want peace go to the other. It's choose yes, no, and this choosing the big theme in the rest of the movie. So who are the yeses? Who wants peace? I know I'm breaking up, bear with me. Have you heard that?
Almost everyone.
Okay.
No, initially
Almost no, they don't want peace.
The first time it's
the
couple.
What? The couple and two others, unclear who they were. Again, so that's bringing the Romeo and Juliet figures together. You know, we get it. Why can't anybody else? But then after that, he says to them, you have to say, you're choosing this for yourself, right? And that's a theme that really comes to the fore at the end as musicians. When he offers Omar a scholarship, basically, to come back to his university and study in Frankfurt. He says, yes, your parents, I understand that, but ultimately, if you want to be a musician, you have to make your own decision. And in a way, that is a huge humanist effort, a recognition of the importance of Omar as an individual, as a person, a unique identity, has his own concerns, but also has the power to choose for himself. This is very freeing. And this is how Spork lets them know they can trust him. He pushes and then he backs off. He says, okay, sorry, I pushed you too far. This is your choice, but I have to lead you here. You know, it's about the journey. The third exercise is when they sit back to back and they're supposed to see each other, but it's an exercise in futility. You can't see each other when you're back to back with the partner you choose. And notice they have to choose each other, and Yossi and Layla choose each other by convenient staging. I mean, you know, the point is not how believable was it that they're together all the time. The point is the exercise itself is telling. And if you've never seen any of these exercises, and there are millions of them, established practice and negotiation techniques and dispute management and psychotherapy, you know, it's really remarkable. People eventually break down and they are their true selves. It's like in a documentary, I think last week, or in The Mole Agent, we talked about how could they get that? You know, the cameras were around. And the answer is, if the cameras are around long enough, you act as though they're not there because you can't stand not being yourself. The truth will out because you're fighting to express yourself and you're motivated to no longer hide because you're frustrated by not being able to express yourself. So that's what that exercise was about, that nobody can see each other.
Jim, I think it's, I don't know if you can hear me when you're frozen, but we have to call him Ron, not Yossi, because there's a big difference. Yossi is, it screams of orthodoxy, and Ron kind of tells you that, and you can see it in his character, that he is comes from a very liberal Jewish background. He's not a kippah wearer. He's not a Yossi. His name is Ron, and it's very important to me in terms of the relationship between the two of them. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I have to say, if anybody knows a great Wi-Fi Ethernet guy to come and really fix the Wi-Fi signal in my house, please.
You just need an enhancer. They make enhancers that you put between your router and the weak parts of your house.
I've had those.
Amplifies the signal.
I've had that. I've had a very expensive Orbi, and it works up to a point. But when I remodeled our house, I put an Ethernet connection in every room. This was 20 years ago. And of course, we're all on Wi-Fi, not on Ethernet, but that's a routing situation from the main box. So we can talk about that later. What was the fourth one again?
Well,
I
don't know if you heard me when I was just saying we've got to call Ron by his right name.
Oh, Ron.
Not Yossi.
Okay.
Because
Ron.
Yossi is an incorrect name, and it gives a picture in your mind of an Orthodox Jew, a whole different background person than Ron has. Ron is not a kippah wearer.
Oh, okay.
And that's important. That's okay.
Okay. So, but the fifth thing was when they're standing around in the final circle. And this, I'm going to fault the director on. because once again, he says, you people have failed to choose for yourselves, right? He says, this is sort of his ultimatum. Choose for yourself if you're going to do this or not. You have a chance here to really accomplish something in an international setting and make great music together. And there's no coverage of the people's faces. You don't see the individual reactions. They begin to rise up. And he doesn't even say, some go to one side, some go to the other. And it's a little unclear what the movement of the people getting up from the chairs is. But a bunch of them huddle, you know, in a group hug off to one side, and there are two who don't go. That group huddle should have been in the middle. It's confusing. And the two guys could have been left seated. Granted, it's a directorial thing, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I resented the confusion, and he did it for maximum separation. And it wasn't as good as it could have been. But that's a seminal moment for the film, because most of them are choosing for the group. They're not choosing, they're choosing to be a part of the group. Doris?
I think the conductor did a fantastic job, excuse me, fantastic job of trying these various things to get the group together. It was wonderful. I mean, it was almost like he was this therapist or something. He seemed to know how to put it together, trying different things, and they seemed to work. And but I think he was just great doing that.
Well, Peter Simonishek is a great European actor. He was the older man in Tony Erdmann, which I didn't find very funny, a 3-hour called the comedy, but it wasn't. And he was also in The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman, about the UN interpreter, whom she plays. Very fine actor. We're going to see him in another film, also called The Interpreter. And he plays the son of a Nazi. And a Jewish interpreter seeks him out because Simonishek's father may have killed the interpreter's parents. And they go on a road trip together back to the scene of the crime. It's a wonderful film, I think, and we'll get to it. But he's a very satisfying actor. You really believe him, and you're with him all the time. But to me, that's sort of, I'm sorry that it happened there, you know, and that coverage, when we say coverage, I mean, we didn't see more of the individuals. He told it in the wide overhead shot instead of showing the faces of the kids in the group hug to give us closure and convince us that they were sincere in what they were doing. And then he tells his own story, right? About Jews and Germans. My parents were Nazis. I know where you're coming from. Decide for yourself. I did. I had to. I chose to make music and not to hear the people who criticized me. Remember, the security guard, after they're cycling and somebody throws a blood bag on him. It's these unknown vigilantes, you know, that also, I think, kill the boy. The security guard says, I'm going to assign 2 bodyguards to you. He says, no. And the chief of security says, why? And he says, because I don't want to live in a world like that. That's a great sentiment. But again, that security guard should have been a figure introduced as soon as they arrived at the villa. You know, it's like, you can't do this to a believing audience. And of course he wears a man bun, right? You know, to show that, you know, he's tough, because even a man bun can't insult his masculinity, and don't mess with him. It's like, it's cliched. And there was a way to soften that too, to make him more believable. He's all business, and that's fine. That's not what was wrong with the treatment. It's that he just pops out of nowhere. We can talk about swimming, you know, finally, so they come together in a successful rehearsal, you know, which I think is Vivaldi's Winter. It's winter. And he says, you know, you were listening to each other, and we've really made progress. Take the day off. And they have a pool party, and that's where the underwater kiss happens. And I found the romance between the two of them to be the least believable part, and especially her naivete, you know, of falling in love, you know, in 3 days with this kid and running away. I think it's Steve, this is where the believability fell down for me too. you know, she's meant to be sensitive and worldly and wise, and then she's just a pubescent teenager, you know, and runs off with him like Romeo and Juliet, and he gets killed. And it didn't end well for me, and dramatically. Doesn't end well for anybody. But I think that was telling. I don't want to be in a world like this, so I'm not going to go along with it. Like, I don't negotiate with terrorists, whether they're vigilantes or white supremacists or, you know, oath takers, oath keepers. You know, I'm sorry. You know, you take a Jewish person hostage, we're not going to negotiate with you. You know, you're going to turn that hostage over, or they'll, you know, we'll fight back. And again, a negative aspect of, I think, if you want to say what didn't paint the Jews all positively, the uncle comes from Potsdam or wherever he came from to rescue the girl from the bed of the dark man, and pulls her away, which creates why Lila says fucking Jews, blaming the uncle for the death of the kid. That doesn't speak well for the Jews, because her parents are conservative too. And if they found out, you know, her bratty little, you know, and here's another thing, her best friend, the woman who storms out of the audition hall, what a bitch, right? From square one. So again, the director is prone to overstatement, even among the Israelis. You know, she didn't have to be that bitchy or that disrespectful. And then she betrays her friend by forwarding the texts and the photos of how good they're getting along. So you know, it fell down for me there, but I respect the effort to say, this is how you bring people together. And for me, that was the intention of the movie. You can disagree with me. You know, you can say it was all one-sided. I think he's not a polemicist. You know, I think you're accusing him of far more propaganda than he's capable of doing. You know, if anything, he's a melodramatist. He's a melodramatic, excessive person. And I rest my case. And we have like 20 minutes left, so let me have it, you know, because I don't have anything much more to say. We can cite instances if you want. Melissa, come on, you're closer to the cohort of the people depicted in the film. How did you react to the veracity of them and their performances?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the scenes sort of in the middle, all of those.
The therapy scenes. The
therapy scenes, actually, a couple of them, and I think we missed one. There was one where they were walking past each other, looking into each other's eyes as well. Yeah. Two of those things I've done in improv classes. Okay. They're very commonly done. The walking one and also the back-to-back. There's a lot of different things you can do back-to-back. Yeah. And so those are really commonly used. And I thought it was interesting to see that in a movie like in an improv setting, there's not really meant to be hate in the room. You know, it's a very different kind of arena that you're in. And so it was interesting to see it used in that setting. But the impact that it has in improv, I can see why you would want it there, because it actually really does make you feel connected to people. I think even just their studies, like just looking into each other's eyes for a certain amount of time automatically makes you feel more connected to somebody. So you start to tap into that, and it was interesting. The shouting scene across the line really got me. And I think...
Why? Tell us what your feelings were when you heard that.
I think, well, for me, I think this movie had the crescendo of the title of the movie, and it had it maybe twice. And that was the first time. And I think it also kind of had that with Bolero. But what I think is interesting about Bolero is that for me as a song, Bolero like gets to an almost impossible level early, and it stays there and somehow continues to rise. And I kind of feel like that happened with this movie too. There are quite a few different beats that happen as you go through, where you're like, how is it going to get, bigger than this? And then it does continue to. So I think, I think the fact that the director tended towards, dialing things up a little bit, it worked for me when I thought about that context. I also think in terms of the love, Jim, it's funny that the love part didn't hold up for you. I think maybe all of us are a little too far away from young love to remember how hormonal you are. And I don't, maybe I believe it. I don't know, but I think it was interesting to see it portrayed like that. I didn't mean to disbelieve it. I could imagine that those two would be really taken with each other.
Okay. I just thought that she acted younger in the falling in love scenes than she did in the prior scenes.
Well, they are young. I mean, I thought of him as a very like shaken character. I don't know if that's the word that I want. He was.
I get that.
His eyes were open to the world, and he was kind of, you know, alert and a little afraid at all times. And I sort of saw her that way too. And I think they connected, but I think there's an openness in that they connected to. That, you know, everybody else was so fixed and closed off, it seemed to them.
No, it's like their reaction to the shouting scene was they couldn't do it. They didn't have that much hate, or weren't used to expressing deeper held feelings like that.
And I was feeling the way that they were about the time that they did. You know, I was starting to be impacted the way that they were. So, you know, they had obviously been trying to put me into their minds from early on in the movie.
It's interesting, you know, having been in groups like this years ago, you get to know the other players as you did in your improv group. And when they photographed those scenes, those exercises, they didn't really emphasize any one person for very long. They didn't build a character or help us understand individuals. It was about the group. And both Oram and what was her name again? Why am I blocking on her name? The blonde girl? Not the Shiksa goddess, but the
Shira.
Shira Haas, right. They weren't featured. Where were they other than in the first exercise reacting to it? They should have been there to maintain their prominence as important characters. You know, when did it work for one and not for another? Or was there a parallel opening up in both of them? Again, you know, it's like those were group scenes that he handled well, I felt. Anybody else have any summary comments about it or fiery comments they want to shoot back? Roy, we rely on your sage observations. If you want to just raise your hand if you want to say anything. What?
Let Michael speak.
You unmuted yourself.
Let Michael speak. I'll speak.
Okay.
That's necessary.
Go ahead, Michael, and then Cindy.
I just had a few random observations. I was going to say, I actually thought it was a good call not to focus on Shira and Omar during the group work because we're already so invested in them as characters, we would have ceased to pay attention to the group dynamic. So for me, that actually worked effectively. On the same topic, I would note that in the credits, I realized that apart from the handful of characters that we get to know, the other musicians in the orchestra are not even named. They're referred to by the instrument.
By their instrument.
So it really was a focus on them more as nameless members of a group, literally, than as individuals.
And another reason to improv their big moments because they weren't actors.
Yeah. And two other quick things, if I can remember them both. I was going to say, for me, I also found the Shira-Omar relationship to be totally believable. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they pegged her as 2 years away from the army, which I believe makes her 16. So presumably he's about the same and doesn't have any facial hair. So I'm going with they're both mid-teens, and that totally tracks for me.
Okay.
And the last thing, just because we were talking about all the different places where that back-to-back technique happens, I've edited a lot of episodes of Super Nanny, and in one from the most recent season I did, she actually does that with a husband and wife that are on the outs. And the idea, at least as it was in our scene, and I got the impression it's like this generally, is that because you don't have to look the person in the face, you have more freedom to be able to say what's on your mind without having to subconsciously be searching their face for reactions that might put you off from telling your truth.
Okay, thank you. Cindy?
With the love story of the 16-year-olds, how naive they truly were. I mean, not to think that they would get caught immediately, but they had no plan, no money, nowhere to go. They were throwing away their future. They didn't take their personal items, well, most of their personal items with them, and just no thought into, it was just, okay, we love each other, let's run away. And the rest of the story, they didn't even think about.
Right. But they remembered the shattered clarinet on the pavement, you know, and maybe that's why people thought it was an accident. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's what I thought it was, a car accident.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I was wrong, but even worse, you know, it should have been the supremacist. It should have been willful on somebody else's part.
I think it was, though.
I
think it was supposed to
agree
be the
with
same people.
I think that it was definitely, not definitely, I think also that it was the same group of vigilantes.
Through the blood bag, yeah. But that was another scene, and you know, granted, it was a lowish budget film. I had to watch it several times before I saw what happened. You know, there's no coverage of Simon Scheck falling off his bike or other people going down, or, you know, they're already getting up when you get close to it. They kept their big distance from that attack. And, you know, to me, that you got to commit and you got to show it, you know, you got to figure out a way to show it even on a low budget.
Until they explained it, I wasn't quite sure.
Right, it wasn't clear. Somebody else had a final comment?
No, Cindy, I think Cindy's right, because I didn't know what happened either. It was kind of nebulous. They don't.
Okay. Roy, did you have any comments?
I would probably agree with Michael regarding the death of the Palestinians. I thought just from the sound that he was struck by a car.
Okay.
The challenge is that there had been the incident on the director where he was hit with the blood bag. So that throws in the idea that there could be some sort of terrorist group present, whereas sometimes things happen by accident, but it's easy to blame the act on sort of some sort of conspiracy, whereas it's just an innocent accident.
Yeah, I think the problem there was they didn't define it. It was a major plot point to establish danger there and risk. But, you know, the less you commit to it as a filmmaker, the less impact it has on the audience. So you lose them for a minute or so.
I don't know, Jim, I don't really think it matters how he dies, whether they chased him.
No, it doesn't. Doesn't really.
In terms of what they were doing at the end, it really, to me, made no difference.
Yeah, it's a minor point. I can concede that. Okay, everybody's kind of said something. Oh, Arlene, come on, I Arlene Marshall too.
Say something, right?
Yeah, you got to say something.
I know.
Lean into the microphone so we can hear you better.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's better.
I don't know if, first of all, the last scene in the airport where they all started playing together, that was, to me, the most beautiful scene in the film. And it meant that they had given up with some of their anger and their hatred. Even though they started to fight again afterwards, it was just because, you know, I don't know if you've ever played an instrument in an orchestra. I have, and you cannot sound so beautiful as they sounded in that last scene without being really simpatico with each other. And so I felt that the movie had achieved some message that things can be done. And done with young people. I don't know that it would be successful at all with those who are their parents, the teachers of their anger and hatred. But the young musicians, I thought, were terrific. If it was in fact they were playing, I don't know.
It was a German symphony.
It was, okay.
Yeah.
Because it was,
But they may all have been musicians anyway. You know, but in that setting, you couldn't have recorded live sound as beautifully as they did. So they were playing back that track on the set in the airport, and the musicians were syncing their movements to the music. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking, you know, the piece is very recognizable, but it does raise its intensity and it's cacophonous at the end. But it ends very swiftly and it resolves itself. And to me, I thought that was parallel to the message of the film. that despite the conflict of, two measures before, beauty was possible to come out of this,
Right.
some kind of peace, whatever.
Otherwise, they couldn't make such beautiful music.
Yeah. Now you said that they continued to fight afterwards. No, the two shots of Layla and
Ron.
what's his name?
Ron.
Ron. Thank you. They were like kind of surprised that they connected. It was like, it wasn't that they'd connected, but oh my God, I never really saw you before. And it's too bad somebody had to die, but that's how I read their expressions. And I thought that was very sweet. So this movie does affect a lot of people, won a lot of awards at international festivals. And we'll see what happens next for them. Now, what's next for us, how do you like that segue, is Winter Journey, Back to the Holocaust. This is another remarkable film that I was just so taken by the first time I saw it. It's about a Jewish musician. I think he was a flutist, and his wife played the harp, and they were playing for orchestras in Germany, and they got out before the crackdown, and they managed to flee to the US, and they traveled around quite a bit because they got commissions at orchestras to play. So that's how they supported themselves. But eventually he stopped playing altogether. And his son comes to interview him over several months about, tell me what you did in the war, Daddy. And it's really, there's a lot of really good archival footage, or they shot it now and they made it look quite good in black and white, of this charming little town in Germany where the guy came from, where the Jews and the Germans coexisted peacefully. And at one point, the father says, well, you remember the trip or the son says, when we went back on the trip, you showed us all the places that were important to you. So they discussed the dad's past life in the town. And the film covers all that process, that journey to, he ends in Phoenix as a widower, or Arizona. And, but there's something that's unresolved. Dad, you never talked about the other people, the ones you left behind. And that's where the film really pays for itself, is when the dad reveals what happened and his residual feelings. And you remember in my email, the dad, like many survivors, and granted he wasn't in a camp, but he fled and lost family, don't really want to talk about the ultimate pain of what they lost. And this film, I think, was the first film that made me feel how he might have felt, because it does so indirectly. And it's really touching that way. It's shot like a documentary. You never see the son. He's the voice behind the camera. And he gets quite irritated with his father sometimes. So that dynamic's interesting. And Bruno Ganz is just terrific. It's such a natural performance. I watched for 20 minutes. I didn't recognize who the actor was. And I thought it was a documentary, and it was quite boring. And I realized, no, this is written based on a true story of a man, and his son wrote 2 books about this life journey. And the son got together with the director of the movie, and they hammered out a screenplay of how do we condense these 2 books and this life story into 90 minutes. It's fascinating, and it's really intimate. And I think it's just another window on what it must have been really like. And that's about all we can see, from our perspective in time. But I'm so glad people are still doing this, and they'll continue to do it. So that's what's ahead of us. I don't know if I announced 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, no, on Saturday, about Jewish Soldiers in Blue and Gray, the film about the Jews on opposite sides of the Civil War. We're going to have Jonathan Sarna, a noted Jewish historian, as our guest. And it turns out that he was one of the favorite students of Rabbi Leder when he was in school. And Rabbi Leder will make an appearance for us and to welcome him. And it's going to be a great event. That's on August 18th. I was waiting to hear, and my big surprise for July is that we will have the 2 Alzheimer's movies, Still Alice and The Father. The date, I just found out today because I saw Elizabeth. She's going to be our guest, and she's very active in the Alzheimer's movement. I didn't write it down. I think it's the 14th of July. It's going to be another Wednesday night. I hope I don't regret that. Rabbi Nanus thought Wednesdays would be better for attendance. And tonight doesn't prove that. But we chose this film because of the turmoil in the Middle East between Gaza and the Palestinians and the Israelis. So I hope it shed some light for you on what was possible. Opened up some wounds, sure. The point is, we always have to be vulnerable and open to new ways of looking at things. And I hope that did a little bit of that for you. After Winter Journey, I haven't decided on the rest of the month because I was waiting for the Alzheimer's film to pin down, but we'll probably have 2 more films next month. So hope to see you with us. Hannah, thank you for writing Herd on All of Us Cats. And I'll see you on the 26th, a week from Saturday. Take care. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Have a good evening.